So, last step in this set of plans about how to play a game of chess. Maybe you don't have even a weakness to attack. Your opponent's not been good enough to give you any weaknesses to attack. Well, I'm going to show you a couple of games where we follow a player who is able to win the game because they make a weakness. They make their opponent make a weakness. And here's an example of a couple of those. There's a game here between a couple of players, and a rather funny opening which I don't recommend you play for black, but black gives up the centre in the hope of being able to develop round it, or maybe knock some holes in it, and so we get this position with a blocked centre, and that black has castled, both sides have castled on the king's side, and black finds no better way of sorting out their position than moving their knight back to c6, from c6 to b8, and now to d7. And it may be that black's now hoping to start attacking the white centre with moves like c5 and c takes d4. Well, that's what black wants to do. What does white want to do? Well, I guess white's got more space on the king's side. White's pieces feel like they're pointing that way. We've got a half open line down to the king here. We've got a bishop pointing in that direction, and just that this chain of pawns means that white's got more space on the king side. But how are we going to attack that? Looks a pretty solid king side at the moment. Well, in some other games we've seen white run their king side pawns at the opponent, but actually white's castled king side in this game as well. Maybe we don't want to do that. And what white does is play moves like knight on g5. Now that attacks h7 and threatens checkmate, deadly checkmate. But you might think, well, that is a big threat, but black can meet it very easily. And I sometimes say there's a sort of a one-move attack, and it's got a one-move defence. And really, who has that helped? Well, actually, I think we can say who that has helped in this position, because black's been forced or persuaded to move their king side pawns, and they've made some weaknesses around their king. These squares now don't have any protection, and it may be we can get through those to this sort of a square. So black's got some dark squared weaknesses, we say, because white's made them weaken their pawns, their wall of pawns. So queen e4, we're going to kick this knight out of the way because that's protecting one of the squares that we're interested in. And now queen to h4, and again we're attacking a tender point in black's position, threatening checkmate. But again, black seems to be able to meet this threat very quickly and easily by playing h5, but it's made another weakness. So this pawn on g6 now is not as well defended as it was. Now this doesn't matter yet, but it's going to matter. Let me show you. Queen f4, queen e8, knight e4, rook h8, and because when the knight moves back, the queen's now got an opportunity to move in, perhaps with great embarrassment for the black king. So rook comes to h8 to stop that. Knight comes to g5, which is piling up a bit of pressure on perhaps the f pawn. Black comes back with the rook, and now knight to f6, using one of those weakened squares, and black's queen's being attacked. They don't want to they don't want to take the knight, because, well, that's what happens if you do take the knight. If you take it with this knight, you're going to lose a bishop. That's a pawn fork. If you if you take it with a bishop check, the king has to go back. But now there may be no easy way of stopping the white queen from moving into the king's position and maybe checkmating on either h7 or g7, so that doesn't look very good. So black moved their queen, and while white was thinking about their next move, black resigned, because white can still play what they wanted to do, which is to move their queen in. They can what we want to do is move the queen into h6, and we can move the knight out of the way with what we call a clearance sacrifice. And now queen to h6, king f7, and this is checkmate. So white's been able to win the game, not because black had weaknesses to start with, but because white made some weaknesses, forced or tempted black into making some weaknesses. It may be, to be honest, black could have defended better in several places, but it did look very one-sided there, didn't it, because of the weaknesses on the black side. So if your opponent doesn't have any weaknesses, maybe you can give them some. Here's another example. Funny opening maybe, but the first thing that's happened is that white's moved out their bishop to b4, and it may be a threat. It may be a threat. You know, it might not be scared of it, but there may be a threat sometimes to play something like takes and takes, and these messy pawns here might become weak. It's very hard to defend the c pawn from behind, and the front c pawn, this the one that's now highlighted. That pawn often gets weak in these sorts of positions. I can imagine black attacking it with moves like bishop to a6, knight to c6 to a5, and maybe even black could get the queen involved. So this is a well-known type of plan for black, is to make a weakness on the c file, take the knight, make some weaknesses, and then black can attack them. White thinks, well, you want to make a weakness in my position, well, I'm not going to let you. I'm going to play bishop to d2, and I'm going to defend against that, so when you try and make a mess of my pawns, they're going to be fine. Well, we play some more moves, c5, and now white forces black to make this capture, and white's pawns are all still very tidy. So knight to e4, try to make a mess of the pawns again. White defends, takes, and now we come over to f6 with the queen, and now we're threatening to make a mess of white's pawns on the f3 square here, and also we're probably threatening to win a pawn, are we, by black? So if white doesn't do anything terribly interesting, I think to take here, and there's a nasty pin of the white knight, so the white knight won't be able to move and defend that pawn on d4. So white defends the pawn on d4, and now black does make a mess of white's pawns by taking on f3, and so black's tried to make a mess, and they have made a mess. So white's got some weak pawns and some weak squares. Knight to c6 is a smart move, and in this position one of the weak squares that we've got is this one. I'll put it in red to show it's weak. The black knight can come to d4, and there's not much that white can do to stop that, and once it comes into d4, well, there's not much that white can do to swap it off, except by giving up the rook for which is worth 5 points for the knight that's worth 3. So knight to c6 is a very smart move, making use of this weak square on d4. White may make a mistake here by playing d takes c5, b takes c5. Now I think this pawn starts to look a bit weaker. Before white made the swap and opened up the b file, I don't think that pawn looked too weak, but now it looks rather weak. You can say, well, white's got this weakness on d7 to look at, which is true, but I'm not quite sure how white's going to attack that pawn. That seems that black will be able to play knight to d4 and cover that pawn rather easily. So I don't think that's been a fair swap at all. bishop to g2, rook to b8, rook to d2, and now black holds that pawn down, ready to be attacked. Black doesn't castle but keeps their king in the middle, and here's this knight d4 move that we expected. If one of the points of white's last move, f4, was to threaten to take the knight, because that's going to be a strong knight if it comes in, and so rather than let it be taken, the knight comes into d4, this very, very nice square for the knight. King to c1, and now there's the most natural move on the board is probably rook on to bring the last piece into play, rook a to rook on h to b8, but black plays a sneaky move of h5 first, and maybe black's threatening to play something like h4 and just tease white about the pawns on the king side, and white plays a very natural move h4 to stop the pawn going forward. I mean, if that's what black wants to do, let's stop it. But now rook on h to b8, and there's another threat has arisen. If this rook wasn't here, black would be able to play the knight in with a check, and one of the things that now works that didn't work before is if the white plays, I don't know, some sort of move like rook e1, now moves out of the way, capturing a pawn, check, king moves, takes, rook takes b2, and because white's had to recapture with the f pawn on g3 instead of the h pawn which moved, now this check wins the bishop. So because of that h4 move by white, the bishop was the bishop's invulnerable. So after rook on h to b8, white had a little think, and the penny dropped. So bishop to f1, not a move that I think white particularly wanted to play. Rook to f3, which is an invasion, and now as well as an invasion threatening this fork by the knight on this square, and white moves out of the way, in fact to the d1 square, and black spots an opportunity here. If the rook could jump over the pawn and come to b8, it'd be checkmate. So white says, alright, let's see if we can arrange that. Rook takes a3, and now rook to a1 is going to be mate. If we take the rook, rook to b8 is going to be mate, and if we don't do anything at all, then black's in a very strong position and has just won a pawn. So white decided that they'd had enough. Their kingside pieces are all still in bed, and that was enough for white. So not winning by well, actually in the end it was an attack on the king, but you can win material and win the game by creating weaknesses. You don't have to wait for your opponent to volunteer to create some. So that's the last way to win a game of check, is to make some weaknesses, then you can attack the weaknesses, and then maybe you can either attack the king or win some material to win the game later. And hope you got something out of that. Thanks very much.